This idea of Link going to the moon in The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom started as a joke. I remember when the first teaser came out for Tears of the Kingdom, back when we just knew it as a sequel to Breath of the Wild, and we saw Hyrule Castle rising from the ground. There were some people joking around at the time that maybe we could go to space. And at the time, it was definitely 100% just a joke. At least to me, I thought it was just a joke. But from that moment, I at least speculated that we could be going to the skies, and I thought that when they were coming out with Skyward Sword, the whole idea would be that they were using that to help advertise this huge sky element to Tears of the Kingdom. And then at E3 2021, that's what they confirmed. That part of the theory sort of held true. But as more and more evidence has presented itself, I've started thinking, what if there is something to this idea of space? What if there's something to this idea of the moon? And over time, as more and more information has come out, I'm not sure I'm joking anymore. I think there might be something to this idea of Link going to the moon in Tears of the Kingdom. And that's what we're talking about today.
Hey, listen!
Welcome everyone, this is Andres Restart, and today we're talking about Link potentially going to the moon in Tears of the Kingdom. This is a theory. We don't know if it's going to happen, it's for fun, but as more and more evidence has presented itself, I'm starting to think there might be something to this idea, so that's why we're talking about it today. But before we jump into things, let me point out that we are aiming to hit 25,000 subscribers by the time Tears of the Kingdom comes out on May 12th. So if you enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell, because then we might just make it. In order to better illustrate my perspective here on Link potentially going to the moon, I think I need to tell you a little bit about my theory about the logo for Tears of the Kingdom. And a while ago I put out a dedicated video on this subject, but basically, I don't think the logo is an Ouroboros. I understand that it does resemble an Ouroboros, and maybe there is something to that idea, that meaning of a cycle and eternity, but an Ouroboros is a snake or serpent going around in a circle, eating itself, its head eating its tail. But that's not what we see with the Tears of the Kingdom logo. It's two dragons rotating about each other with their mouths closed. They're not eating each other. Part of my theory on what the logo may suggest has to do with this nature of going about the world. Two different forces going up and down. We've seen a tremendous amount of sky stuff in Tears of the Kingdom, and thanks to the latest trailer, we now have pretty darn good proof that there are extensive areas that we're exploring underground as well. So I think there's something to this idea of the up and the down, the heavens and the underworld. Which brings me to my next point. The underworld, the malevolent forces that come from the underground. We know that Ganondorf, who's been confirmed since the latest trailer, we find him in the underground before the upheaval starts. And then when that occurs and he's resurrected fully, Hyrule goes through a transformation and the sky barrier breaks down and some of these sky islands become visible and terrain crashes onto Hyrule. But also seemingly there's some seismic activity, there's quite a bit of changes, and Ganon's malevolent forces rise from a fissure, it seems. Very much like the introduction to Skyward Sword when they were depicting Demise and his demonic forces. And many have drawn comparisons to the design of Ganon this time around, or some of his transformations, and how they look very Demise-like. And I do think there's at least some inspiration here. But perhaps what I think is most important is how there's this importance of the horns, very demon-like, underworld-like, and how it looks like Ganondorf summons the Blood Moon. We speculated before the final trailer that there was an emphasis on the Blood Moon, but with the latest trailer, I think that that's become very much clear. It's been summoned, and there it is as Ganondorf is transforming or undergoing some sort of process where he has the glowing red hair and the horn, and the Blood Moon is closer than ever before, covering the entire sky. It's incredibly close. And it's at least been made clear that the Blood Moon is more important in Tears of the Kingdom than it was in Breath of the Wild. Moving on to the skies, though, that's also clearly important. We understand that it's not just the underground, the skies have been the main central point of all the promotional material. And we're not even entirely sure just how big the Sky Islands are. We don't know how expansive this is, but what we do understand is that what they've shown so far, we've only seen Link getting about as high as around the 2,000 mark. And what's interesting about that is that technically, that Z-axis on the minimap can go up to 9,999. And we also see a lot of islands stretching far above into the distance. Just how high can we go? We don't know, but we do understand that Link has a number of abilities to help him get higher and higher. We have Ascend that allows him to go through ceilings. We have Recall that allows him to reverse the time of particular objects that can take him back up into the air. And then we also have Ultra Hand, which allows Link to build and craft vehicles, some of which can fly. And what's funny about this is that before the final trailer, there were jokes that maybe there was something to the idea of Link going to the moon and we could build a rocket ship. Well, there's a rocket ship in Tears of the Kingdom. Link attaches it to his shield and he rises up. It's clear that they're at least playing around with this idea of exploring higher with advanced technology. Which brings me to other space-like elements we've observed in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So with Breath of the Wild, during development, they were exploring around with the idea of this giant flying saucer chasing around blasting at Link, basically referencing aliens attacking Hyrule. And what makes this even more interesting is that when you consider the Sheikah monks and how they're this ancient people, they resemble Mayan civilization or other ancient cultures, in part because we've seen some of their structures that show constellations, which may relate to this idea of this ancient culture having a better understanding of the skies than stars above, but also when you consider the conspiracy theories of ancient aliens, how the Mayan cultures, the Aztec cultures, the Egyptian cultures may have gotten assistance from a higher power or source from outside of our planet. It might be an explanation as to how the Sheikah monks have the technology and knowledge they have. Maybe they got assistance from an otherworldly power. Not necessarily aliens, but maybe Goddess Hylia. At the very least, they were playing around with some otherworldly ideas during the development for Breath of the Wild. But it doesn't stop there. In Tears of the Kingdom, I think it's even more significant. So, throughout the surface of Hyrule, we see these giant geoglyphs, something like the Nazca lines or crop circles. And what's fascinating about this is that in real life, there's another conspiracy theory that these giant lines that you can see from the stars above or from the skies were made by an otherworldly power, an alien or angels or something like that. The geoglyphs give a little bit of that alien-like vibe. And just to make my stance clear, while I do think there could be intelligent life out there, I'm not suggesting that crop circles or the Nazca lines or the ancient pyramids are tied to aliens necessarily, but simply that when we talk about these things, especially in video games, it could be hinting at an otherworldly power. But there's more. Thanks to the latest trailer, we've now observed that they've been playing around with some physics that I would argue are otherworldly. So we've seen several scenes that have these blue particles, and in these blue particles we've seen that the gravity is different. Link is doing moon-like jumps, very much like how an astronaut would be jumping around on the moon. So they're already playing around with anti-gravity mechanics or reduced gravity mechanics in some of the higher up Sky Islands. What happens when we get even higher? Do the physics change even more so? Is gravity pulling you down even less so? We don't know, but it's something to consider. Now I understand that the idea of Link going to the moon may seem lofty and crazy, but at the end of the day, this is the game and there are all sorts of possibilities. And it wouldn't even be the first time we've gone to the moon in a Zelda game. The final area in Majora's Mask was the moon. That's where we had the final boss fight. And also, there were alien abductions on the ranch in Majora's Mask as well. And many have also drawn comparisons between Majora's Mask and Tears of the Kingdom, both being very dark games. The point is that there is precedent for both aliens and exploring the moon in a Zelda game. And while you might argue, well, they're not going to do the same thing again, I would agree they probably wouldn't do the exact same thing again, but every Zelda game references several other Zelda games beforehand in some way or form. So would it be a stretch to think that they will do something to reference Majora's Mask, and could it even extend to the gameplay? It's at least possible, right? But why would Link even want to go to the moon? What would be the point? Well, we understand that Ganondorf is a real threat this time around. Given that he was the source of all the malice and the Calamity Ganon attacks generation over generation, and that we heard Zelda tell Link in the February Direct trailer that she's unsure that Link could beat it this time around, that suggests that this Ganon is extremely powerful, perhaps the most powerful than ever before. He might need a little bit of help, especially when you consider that Ganondorf seems to have summoned the Blood Moon, where his power seems to be coming from, and it's right there, at least during his transformation. So what if Link needs to seek a higher power in a higher area? What if they need the Triforce? The Triforce can grant the wielder any wish they seek. Well, what you might bring up is that Zelda already had the Triforce in Breath of the Wild. She did, but we don't know if she does. Because she uses the Triforce, we literally can observe the symbol being used as she's eliminating Calamity Ganon. But she also says in the final scene of Breath of the Wild that her powers have dwindled, and we haven't seen a sign of the Triforce since. She does still seem to have some sort of goddess-like abilities based off the last trailer, but it's not necessarily the Triforce. And what we understand the Triforce is that once it's used, it will return to the Sacred Realm. And what's interesting about that is that the Sky Islands might relate to the Sacred Realm in some way. First off, we understand that the dragons in Breath of the Wild ascend to the heavens as described in creating a champion. And we know the dragons are flying around the Sky Islands, the heavens. And what's more interesting about this is that the Sacred Realm has been depicted as a golden land, and all of these Sky Islands have gold all throughout. I think there's an intention here. But here's my final point. So maybe Link is exploring higher and higher, trying to get to the Sacred Realm, or exploring the Sacred Realm already in search of the Triforce in order to have something to defeat Ganondorf. Well, there's this piece of art from A Link to the Past that represents the Sacred Realm. And when you take a look at it, what you'll notice is that there's a whole bunch of islands floating in the sky, just like these islands in Tears of the Kingdom. And there we see the Triforce, but if you look on the top part of the image, what you may notice is something that appears to be like the moon. What if the idea is at the very top of the Sky Islands, the heavens, the Sacred Realm is so high up that it's right by the moon? And what if part of Link's goal is to acquire the Triforce to, yes, have some sort of way to handle Ganondorf, but maybe it also ties into this idea that the Blood Moon is the source of Ganon's power, and that's where the Triforce is, and what if it all culminates together in maybe a final battle near or at the moon? And I understand how crazy it may seem that there could be a giant final epic battle sequence on the moon above Hyrule, high up in the skies, the very top of the Sacred Realm. But if the moon is the source of Ganon's power, and if the Triforce is far into the Sacred Realm, which is high up into the skies approaching the moon, maybe there's something to this idea. Maybe Link will use his abilities, including a rocket ship, and these anti-gravity mechanics to get so high up that we approach the moon or get there so we can get the power we need to stop Ganon. And I'll also point out that I don't think we're going to fight Ganon in Hyrule Castle again. I think this time the stakes are going to be higher. I think they're going to want to do something different. And the moon would be quite the stage, or at least at the very top of the Earth where the moon is very visible. And that's my theory on Link going to the moon and Tears of the Kingdom. Does it make any sense? Is it too crazy? Have you noticed anything else that might support this idea? Or do you have another idea that might make even more sense? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andres Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.